few years ago, I was still living with my parents. This was before I left for college. My mom and dad had just bought this huge house far from the city, a massive place surrounded by woods. It looked like a mansion to me. Long hallways, high ceilings, spare rooms that nobody used, and that eerie quietness only old houses have. They loved it. Me, not so much. Something about it always felt wrong. Too empty, too still. One week, my parents went on a trip to visit family and offered for me to go with them. But I didn't want to miss school, so I stayed home to watch the house. That was a mistake I'll never forget. The first couple of nights were fine. I went to school, hung out with friends, and came home to relax. But the third night was different. When I got home that evening, I noticed one of the spare bedroom doors upstairs was wide open. That door was always closed. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I left it open earlier and just didn't remember. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling in my stomach as I walked past it. Later that night, I locked myself in my room and tried to unwind, but the silence in that house was almost loud. You could hear the wood creak and settle, the wind pushing against the walls, and for some reason, every sound felt like footsteps. About an hour later, I went downstairs to make dinner. While I was in the kitchen, I kept catching glimpses of movement from the living room. Every time I looked up, there was nothing, just darkness. By the time I went back upstairs, I was already uneasy. But what really made me stop cold was that same bedroom door, open again. I knew I had closed it. I remember hearing the latch click. Now it was wide open. I stepped closer, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The room was empty, just an unused bed, a dusty dresser, and still air. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Still, I shut the door and locked my own bedroom after that. That night, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy ones, moving down the hallway toward my room. They stopped right outside my door. I muted the TV and sat frozen. Then came a knock. Soft, deliberate. 3 slow knocks. I didn't move, didn't breathe. And then I heard it, the sound of something scraping across the wood. I couldn't tell if it was a knife or nails, but the sound went from the top of the door all the way down to the bottom. I whispered out that I'd called the police, even though I hadn't yet. The knocking stopped, and the silence that followed was worse than the noise. By the time the cops showed up, whoever had been in the house was gone. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. Just a single, deep gash carved into my door, right at chest height. When my parents came back, they didn't even argue. We all agreed to put the place up for sale. And before we left, my dad told me something that made my stomach drop. That house had been on the market for 10 years before they bought it. No one stayed longer than a year. Every family before us complained about doors opening by themselves and someone standing in the woods at night.
We moved, but sometimes when I wake up at night, I swear I still hear it, that soft, rhythmic scratching at my door.
It was a Friday night like any other. I live alone in a small house about an hour from the city, and I'd just finished a long work week. I planned to spend the night gaming, drinking a few beers, and ordering pizza. Around 11, I placed the order on the app and stretched out on the couch. After a while, I realized it had been almost an hour and my food still hadn't arrived. The app said there was a delay, but no big deal. I started to doze off. Then, sometime later, the doorbell rang. Hard. Over and over. Still half asleep, I stumbled to the door. There was a man standing there, hoodie up, hands in his pockets. I said, "Hey, sorry, I hope you weren't waiting long. How much do I owe you?" The guy just stared at me. No pizza boxes, no uniform, nothing. After a few seconds, he smiled and said, "Don't worry, the pizzas are still on the way." That sentence didn't even make sense, but I was tired and buzzed, so I just said, "Okay," and shut the door. It wasn't until I sat back down that I realized how strange that was. If the pizzas were still on the way, why was he at my door? I must have dozed off again, because the next thing I remember was hearing a quiet click. Not the doorbell this time, more like a lock turning. I sat up fast, checked the clock. It was 4 in the morning. The pizza place closed at 1. I opened the app. It said my order had been delayed, then canceled hours ago. That's when it hit me. That guy wasn't a delivery driver. He was lying. I crept to the front door. The lock was undone. I swear I'd locked it after he left. And that's when I heard it. The same click. The door settling into its frame. The sound that woke me up. He'd already been inside. I grabbed my phone, heart racing, and heard movement from the back of the house. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I didn't even think. I ran, out the front door, down the street, barefoot. I called the cops from the corner. When they searched the house, it was empty. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks, just muddy footprints leading from the back door to the living room and then straight to the couch where I'd been sleeping. To this day, they never found out who he was or what he wanted. But I know what I heard. He waited for me to fall asleep again. And if I hadn't woken up when I did, I don't think I'd be here to tell you this. In 2019, I moved to a small town for a new job. I didn't have much money, so I rented the cheapest apartment I could find. A one-bedroom unit in a rundown building with only 4 apartments total. For months, I was the only person living there. No neighbors, no noise, just me. It was lonely and kind of creepy. The hallway lights flickered, the walls were cracked, and the air always smelled faintly of mildew. But rent was cheap, and I was too busy working to care. One night, I came home late from work. As soon as I stepped inside, there was a knock at my door.
I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole, but it was foggy or cracked. I couldn't see a thing. So, against my better judgment, I opened the door. An older man was standing there, gray stubble, messy hair, tired eyes that somehow looked too alert. He smiled and asked if I lived there. I said yes, and he told me he just moved into the unit next to mine. Then he smiled again, this weird, too wide grin, and walked off, without even saying his name. The next night, as I walked up the stairs to my apartment, I saw the blinds in his window shift, like someone had just been watching me. When I got inside, there was another knock. I opened the door. Same man. This time, he asked if I could help him figure out the thermostat in his apartment. He said it was freezing and he couldn't get it to work. At first, I said I was in a hurry, but he kept insisting, smiling, laughing, saying it would only take a second. Finally, I gave in. He led me toward his door, which was already open, but when I stepped inside, I froze. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing. Just bare walls, peeling paint, and a smell like something rotting in the walls. I turned to leave, but his voice dropped lower. "Come on," he said. "It's right in here." Then his face changed. That polite smile melted into something darker, and he took a step toward me. I didn't think. I ran. Back into my apartment, slammed the door, locked it. Seconds later, the handle rattled violently. He was trying to open it. I called the police, and when I mentioned I lived alone, he stopped, just went silent on the other side of the door. Then I heard him whisper, "I only needed your help." His footsteps faded down the hall before the cops arrived. Turned out, the unit next door hadn't been rented out in years. He'd broken in through a side window and had been staying there, watching me come and go every day. They found a sleeping bag and a few empty cans inside, and next to the wall that connected our apartments, they found a small hole drilled through the plaster, right at eye level.
I moved out the next morning.